recording. Good luck. Okay. First, I'll just do a quick roll call to make sure everybody's here. On OG, do we have YISS Yappers?
Yes.
Great. On OO, do we have KIS Cause Chaos?
Yep.
On CG, do we have Pass Cogito?
Yes.
On CO, do we have SIS Marmots?
Mm-hmm.
No worries, that'll be the last time you'll be hearing me doing roll call. And congrats on getting this far to finals. I will be your chair. My name is Min Chang, and today I have two panelists.
My name is Nina. Good luck, everybody.
And my name is Yejun Park. Congratulations for getting this one.
Okay, just some simple etiquette. Obviously, for spectators, you can just clap at the end of their speech, probably not within their things, or you can just wait for that. It's like, obviously, it's a small room, so you can whisper, but please be understanding that debaters are probably speaking to each other, giving notes, and other than that, I think we are fine to begin. On the motion, this House regrets the demonization of nationalism. I invite the Prime Minister to begin this debate.
Hi, my name is Singon. I'll be the Prime Minister for this debate. I'll take a POI, I'll call for one, and then let's begin. Alright, if everyone's ready, I'll start. 3, 2, 1. Nationalism is not a political movement. Nationalism is a natural excitement, energy, and enthusiasm that people feel as their countries are developing and advancing, and they are a part of that change. We believe that this is the reason why, if we demonize nationalism, it will not only prevent people from being able to show and be able to add on to the changes and developments that are happening in the surroundings around them, but we would also believe that it could result in toxic and more radical forms of discussion that could prevent change not only on individual and local basis, but also on a national and federal base as well. Before I go into my two substantives, I want to do two pieces of framing. First of all, what does our world look like and what does their world look like? And secondly, metrics as to who should win this debate. Firstly, what does our world look like in this debate? We would actively promote nationalism by increasing platforms and opportunities that people have to be able to voice out their political views and to be able to engage with the political and economic systems that are readily around them. We would also portray nationalism as a natural desire to benefit the country, not as anything else of kicking out other people, but rather the sole desire to want to contribute to the development of your nation. And we would also increase things like infrastructure to be able to improve things like voting and other types of interaction that naturally benefit and build the relationship between the government and their constituents. Then what does the world look like on opposition's role, right? We will say that heavy demonization looks like as the following. It looks like portraying nationalism that is something inherently radical, xenophobic, or partisan, something that's inherently political, and that trying to be a nationalist comes at the cost of defending other values that a country may want, which is the very truth and misconception that OG wants to get rid of from the start of this debate. The metrics to who wins this debate is, first of all, who can increase the political views and voice of the individual people as well, but secondly, who can actually lead to better change and reform on the larger movement as well on a country basis. With that said, let's go on to the first argument on how nationalism upholds political stability of these countries. The premise being that nationalism keeps people engaged and aware of different issues around them, and it also instills a sense of accountability and hope in the sense that there's a shared goal to better the country and to develop it even further. Then firstly, what are the mechanisms to this argument? A, it empowers and encourages people to be vocal about their views and their political viewpoints, right? We would say they will feel more engaged in their political system and take current events more seriously around them. We would say that there's a natural desire to want to contribute to your country, and nationalism is the most effective tool in being able to capitalize on that desire and be able to translate it into real change through things like protest demonstrations, or even if it's just having single discussions with your friends and family as well. The second mechanism as to why we're able to ensure political and economic stability in countries through nationalism is because it helps people keep a higher powers accountable, right? There's an inherent desire and an increased likelihood for people to want to check if their nation is operating and developing properly, whether this is about political candidates and voting and whatnot. The third mechanism is that we establish a sense of community. You have a shared goal and desire that you all want to benefit the country, and we think that when you prevent and regret the demonization narrative on it, then you're able to remove the partisan effect that it has, and now it's seen as something that any patriot or any citizen of that country would want, not a single political party at all. With that said, what are the impacts? First of all, you increase political discourse and engagement. This is the most obvious natural result. You increase people in voter turnout, you increase these numbers as a whole. But secondly, you would say you better the relationship and more trust between the government and their constituents insofar as the government is now seen as an institution of trust and a carrier of change, and someone who actually factors in the nationalist views of these people. Then why has demonization prevented this from happening, and therefore it should be regretted in this debate? It's because it has painted nationalism as something inherently political and prevents people and radical, and therefore people are afraid to express their views to people around them. Before I go into the second argument, are there any POIs? Seeing none, let's move on to the second argument on the demonization of nationalism promotes radical groups to rise up as well. Why is this inherently true? Demonizing is very intense and inherently aggressive as well. It means to say that portraying something as evil will definitely elicit some type of response as well. Attacks on nationalists elicit a similarly absolute response because they try to feel threatened. When you demonize something, you present yourself as someone who cannot be negotiated with, but rather that that as a whole this institution or this belief doesn't make sense, and therefore we think that the possibility of them trying to become radical and trying to resist is far greater under their world when there is demonization. This looks like in the US, where radical groups rising up because American identity is solely founded on the political nationalism that is demonized by other countries and seen as something as imperialism. So an attack on nationalism was an attack on the American people as well. What are the impacts here? The impacts are twofold. First of all, you increase radicalization by a whole lot, right? You make these people feel like they need to defend themselves in the most extreme versions of their beliefs, and we think that they're no longer, and other people, meanwhile, like moderates, are now afraid because they feel like their views are inherently something that will not be accepted. But secondly, you also increase things like polarization and the natural consequence of having polarized political views is that you're no longer able to get stuff properly and efficiently done. People get hurt unnecessarily, and then there's increased political violence as well. We think that's something that is a natural feeling that people have to contribute to their community and feel a sense of belonging, and that is being turned as something that's a political justification for violence and oppression of different minorities and majorities. And again, we're able to prevent that most effectively on OG. Very proud to propose.
Thank you for the fine speech. Now I invite the leader of opposition.
The most important question to answer in this debate to win is what is nationalism, and then how does nationalism impact people on the ground. I'm going to do two layers of framing before moving on to my arguments to solidify what these things mean. I think I agree with Seung-won when he says it may have been an excitement to your country at the start. When you started your country, there were these revolutionaries that cared immensely for your country, but it has become a narrative because there are still people that are skeptical about their country. There are Americans that hate their own country because it's not something that they support. But nationalism is the prevailing narrative, which means that if you go against this prevailing narrative, then you're probably going to get blocked out. You're coerced to buy into such narratives from when you are a baby, because at school they make you do the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're American, if you're Korean, they make you sing the Egguka, things like that. And I think secondly, we disagree with the core mechanization of nationalism is just interest in your country, because I can be a Chinese person that hates America, and I can be super invested into their politics, and I can be super against anything that happens in America, and I'm super interested in America still, but I hate America, right? I'm not a nationalist to America. No, nationalism is when you have unconditional support for the core values of your country, and of course there's still politics, there's still discourse and things like that, but sorry, at the core, you're incredibly loyal to what your country stands for. So if I'm American, I stand for the values of freedom and free speech and like things like I don't know, capitalistic values. If I'm Chinese, then maybe I value Chinese values, or things like that have evolved from Marxism or communism more over the capitalistic values of America. I think I'm going to mechanize nationalism to look like two things to better visualize what we're debating about. Firstly, I think nationalism is waving your flags in front of everyone, stating that you love your country and you would die for your country and all these things that soldiers do, all of these things that maybe propaganda posters have looked like in the past. But secondly, this also looks like demonizing other countries that have bad relations or bad historical relation, because you feel like you're the embodiment of your country. For example, if I'm an Indian, then maybe I hate Pakistanis because my government has a bad geopolitical relationship with them. If I'm from South Korea, maybe I hate Japan or North Korea. Secondly, then what is the likely counterfactual on our side? So if we hate nationalism, then what happens? I think without nationalism, people are more free and make up their own minds about the issues of their country, because it's very unlikely that me as a person living in the United States, as a person paying taxes to the United States, as a person affected by the policies that my country makes, will suddenly be like, wait, I don't care about my country, and then suddenly move on. I think though, you care more about the global scope of things than instead of your own values. one engagement before I move on to my rebuttals. I think when Simon says we create more political engagement and turnout, I think there are other ways to do this, increasing controversy, making these media things. These are also ways that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump made their own voter turnout increase and politics more important. I don't know why it has to be done through nationalism. First argument then on global interconnectivity. I think I already explained to you, when you become the embodiment of your country, you get hostility against other nationalities and nations. I think this creates hate that is not justified. This is the same mechanism that Hitler or these other dictators used to rally their people against certain minorities. And I think this is a tool that has been exploited in the past consistently. So one engagement in this point too, someone mentions that when you demonize nationalism, people will engage against this and they'll fight. When you demonize terrorists, of course terrorists will rise up because they're like, oh, they're demonizing us, we're gonna demonize them too. But I'd like to mention one thing. Demonization is usually done by the majority, which means that if the majority of people disagree with nationalism, then that's going to be the prevailing narrative. But secondly, this is a regrets motion, so it happens for the start of time, I guess, and though nationalism must have existed, there's not going to be a strong base of people that are devoted to nationalism, because, again, it's a regress motion from the start of time. Then, secondly, regarding your, about a less extreme harm against, or than Hitler or things like that, I think regarding your country's identity traits as your own and becoming the embodiment of your country without a choice, leads to nationalism that forces people to be proud of things and factors that you cannot control. Before I elaborate, I'll take your POI because time's running out.
Nationalism is the basis of all individuals' views because people develop political ideas based on their definition of what is best for their country.
Yeah, but if I was born into my country, maybe I was born into a country that values capitalism and freedom. I did not decide to be born into my country. This goes against consent because even though I might not agree with America's core principles of complete freedom or true capitalism, I cannot go against that and I cannot go against the prevailing narrative. But one level deeper, maybe I wouldn't have agreed with such core principles if I was born into a country that did not value the thing. But since I was born in here, I was brainwashed and I was conditioned to think about these things such as that. And I think one final point before I move on very quickly to the second argument because I have no time. If you don't have nationalism, then there's more discourse because people are not afraid to say what they think because they don't say, oh, if I go against my country's nationalist views, I'm going to be demonized into the ground. No, everyone's opinions value the same thing. Very quickly about globalization then. I think there's a prevailing narrative or a rising narrative of globalization, the stance of globalization and global connectivity. And I think people are the building blocks of these opinions. The people at the top cannot change their opinions or country's stance without changing the narrative, which is directly tackled at this motion. It's better to be global because companies have a sharper competitive edge. There's more global trade and fair relationships, fair prices. And thirdly, people can freely enjoy countries' opportunities, contexts, and cultures. Very proud to stand as Ogle.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Everyone's ready. My time starts in 3, 2. When Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, it took less than 2 hours or something for a mob of citizens to be protesting outside his office, even though it was the dead of night in a Korean winter. This political speed in holding leaders accountable to protect the well-being of the country that they love and support is exactly what nationalism is and why change is ever able to happen in the first place. So proud to propose. A couple things in my speech then. Firstly, on a couple clarifications on what nationalism is, and secondly, in terms of the rebuttals, and then finally on our final extension on why the fabric of your society falls apart and you are unable to create political change. Firstly, on clarifications then. 1, what is nationalism? We want to tell you that they they said that it's believing in the core values of your country. So this means that it's unlikely to change with time, or it's unlikely to change with whatever political trends are happening, but rather going back to the core principles of liberty and freedom. Why does that sound bad to you? Note here that this does not mean that xenophobia or those hateful things are necessarily a part of that country or a part of nationalism, but it just means that nationalism, you want your country to succeed, you want to love your country, you want to trust in your government, and you're willing to take the necessary means in order for that to happen. So we want to tell you that the demonization of nationalism is just not good, because firstly, demonization itself itself is just not good in any situation, but also because nationalism can inherently be used for good. And note here that opposition tries to kind of make their burden not sound as high. But demonization means that you hate this thing. The way that they describe how nationalists view non-nationalists or those from other countries, that is how society views nationalists in their world. They want to crucify these nationalists because they believe that they are unable to be negotiated with, that you are not able to discuss them out of their views. They think that anyone who is a nationalist and loves their country is inherently very, very evil and not someone that anybody should go near. That is not how you create positive political change, no matter what. And that goes the same for the demonization of anything, like the demonization of religion, or the demonization of people groups, like the demonization of anything, and making it so, oh, we cannot touch this at all because it is so bad. That is not something that creates positive discourse and change. Before moving on, I'll take that PR.
The very textbook definition of nationalism is that people from a certain nation believe that they are better than people from other nations simply because of their nationality. What do you think about this?
That is not true. Firstly, we believe that nationalism, even if you have pride in your country and you believe that your country is very, very strong, that firstly does not mean that you believe that you are better than other countries. But even if you did believe that you were better than other countries, this does not necessarily translate into hating on people from other countries and being unwilling to participate in anything like political with other countries. For example, like the French Revolution or the American Revolution, both of those things were founded on nationalism. They were unable to function without nationalism. This does not mean that they started waging war on other countries, but rather that they tried to protect themselves, and rather that they were able to fire like that passionate energy into creating actual change for themselves and creating a society they actually wanted to live in, despite the institutions they were fighting against being like very, very hardened and very, very well lived in. That is how we got democracy in the United States in the first place, and why there's such an unprecedented society of diversity and of freedom and of independence. Moving on to rebuttals then quickly, because they spend most of their speech like describing what nationalism is to you, but I don't think that is the core, like the biggest part of this debate, but rather what the demonization of nationalism is doing. But let's talk about what they said, which is global interconnectivity, which they did touch upon the point of how like everybody hates everybody because you are nationalist. Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, if you, just because like those who attended the protest against Yoon Suk-yeol does not mean that they're suddenly going to hate on like any other country, or hate on any other country that is not Korea, or believe that they are inferior. You're still able to have, like, for example, good friendships from individuals from other countries, but still like be proud of what your country stands for. You can do that and disagree with others. But this means that on their side, if you demonize nationalism, if you do meet a nationalist from another country, if they believe that oh, I am a nationalist, I love my country, I'm proud of my government, then you automatically believe that they are evil and you are unwilling to engage in any form of discourse. We think that is when society is not able to function. But finally, on how like this is the only way that we're able to create change. We think that especially with politics, it is tiring and it is hard to be a part of, but that is exactly why you need something as like powerful as nationalism in order to galvanize you towards change, and to, especially if you are in a very, very bad situation and you're suffering a lot, nationalism is what can help pull you out of those situations and give you hope. For example, how black nationalism in the United States created the Harlem Renaissance or the Black Panther movement that was able to create so much social good. That is the kind of power of nationalism. It pulls you out of impossible situations. This is not something that should be demonized. So proud to propose.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to conclude opening half.
This is fun.
I lost it. Speech. Have you ever seen the movie 300? It's when someone basically says, we need to fight the other people. When the Spartans rush into war, guess what? Everyone dies. Similarly, let's talk about Hitler.
Hitler was basically like, oh, we're Germans, and these Jews are hurting our country. Guess what happened? 6 million people died because of nationalism. Because people were one-dimensional of their own stance. They didn't take a step back and see what is this leader talking about? What is my leader talking about? They didn't take a step back. They're one-dimensional. There's no discourse under their side. Ultimately, that means peace or just global connection cannot happen under their side. We're very proud to be on the side of the world. Then I'm gonna just do 2 things in this speech. First, I'm just gonna engage on the past speaker, like the previous speaker, explain why most of the claims are just inherently wrong. And secondly, I'm just going to go on to the main case, explain why even if under best case, where like communities still exist, I'm going to first prove that it's wrong, but why even if it does exist, why it's just still inherently harmful for them. And first, let's just go on to rebutting like the previous speaker. I think OG is correct to assume that nationalists will believe that Yoon Sung-yeol was probably a bad threat to Korea's interest. But the thing is, Yoon Sung-yeol is a controversial figure. But then not to mention, let's frame Yoon Sung-yeol's perspective. The reason why Yoon Sung-yeol literally caused like a bunch of martial law is because of how because the opposition party literally wanted to impeach him. Why? It's because of the reason he kept sending like, I don't know, trash bombs to North Korea because of his own nationalistic idea that, oh, North Koreans are a common enemy, we have to destroy them. That is exactly the reason why Yoon Sung-yeol causes so much controversy in general. We say the fact that they used Yoon Sung-yeol, a very controversial figure, and we were able to flip that against you by saying that Yoon Sung-yeol's interests were based on nationalism, which eventually led to like the impeachment, and also about like the martial law. We said this is very harmful under their side because these figures constantly just push this narrative. But then secondly, what do we mean by core values? And I think this is just largely just unresponsive by growth. Because we say maybe people value capitalism is better than socialism or vice versa. But people can choose whether they want to do it or not. Because nationalism directly tells you that if I live in America, that capitalism is inherently just the only thing that's beneficial or beneficial to me, and the only correct and the only thing and the only country that I have to support. We say that nationalism makes you so that you are ultimately just forced into a world where you first did not even consent into, but second that you have to like actually opt into your country's rules and opt into your country's saying, because otherwise you're also demonized because of the reason that you're not seen as a nationalist, you're not seen as someone who's like supporting the country, but rather someone who's going against the core values of what makes that country. Ultimately, that means that nationalism is just far just worse under their side. Then just like quickly before going into rebuttal, I just want to like clarify what demonization means, because I feel like the previous speaker did not understand. It looks like, for example, by saying that, oh, you're actively harming other countries, that you're directly like, I don't know, like, for example, like when Yoon Sung-yeol was about to like create like martial law, where you directly say that because of nationalism, that you're harming our own like stability and other countries' stability. It also looks like where you're being, for example, saying like, oh, that this point is just inherently wrong because you're not even taking like a different step back to actually realize what's happening. Then after clarifying that, let's just go on to their arguments about political stability, about having a shared goal, and also like basically about how like their main point is about like community, right? We say that political stability still happens because the burden that OG needed to prove to you is explain why community inherently, like nationalism inherently makes a community. But the thing is, I already have like, there's things that already makes me have a community. For example, I have a desire to get money, which is why I probably have a community with my co-workers. I also have the desire to care for my family, which I have the inherent desire to actually make another community inside. We don't get why, like especially when it only means that you are one-dimensional to your only country stance. That is the problem that happens under their side. But exclusively, even if, no thank you, that community still exists. We say national directly says that I should unconditionally love my country. Note that this was not contested by Brooke. This means that the people around me and the people that like, I don't know, dance and wave the flags are all correct, and people who don't do this are inherently ones that are going directly against my country because they're not supporting the values. This is what nationalism looks like, and we were able to clear that up. That means they have less discourse under their side house. It's rather than taking a step back and saying, maybe I should, I don't know, like opt into like this rule or also this rule. But the nationalism forces you to opt into, if I'm in USA, that I have to opt into capitalism, even if I have some bit of discourse to share. That means the impact is clear. That under their side of the house, there's little to no discourse under their side of the house, because it means that when you try to give a different point of perspective, when you try to make a different type of change, you're unable to do that because you can. That is seen as someone that's going against the country's nationalism. take this around. For example, like I don't know, like social movements. For example, like the civil rights movement. These are things that are made by the country, that the country was built upon. For example, USA was made from like I don't know, like slavery or whatnot. Under their side, you cannot protest this because this was something that inherently created the community, and this was something that inherently made the community. If you go against this, you're demonized. You're someone that's looking against the community. We say that nationalism is good only when you have a choice. We say the demonization is what we want. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the member of government.
Three, two, one. I first want to make the counterfactual clear. When we regret demonization, that is essentially a retrospective notion. And demonization is saying that something is really bad, something is really evil before even giving it a chance. So the counterfactual here is clear. We will give it a chance. We will try to consider it, and therefore we will take more reasons of nationalism instead of always shunning it away like their side does. So we're going to have two important extensions here. So first one going right away is that we prevent the brain drain of developing countries. So why is this true, first of all? Well, because without nationalism, it is more clear for the, it is more like, aside from nationalism, it feels more right to go to a developed country and work and earn money as a citizen of the developing world. What do I mean by this? Well, for example, like the companies that are inside of Nigeria, or the companies that are inside of like Philippines, they are arguably smaller, and therefore you are able to earn less money if as a Nigerian, or if as a Filipino, I continue to work in here. So therefore, for economic reasons, these people often move to the USA, they often move to the South Korea, or they often move to the United Kingdom, and therefore earn much more money for myself. But consider this. This is rooted in that I like money, and this is rooted in that I like myself and individualism. Now this is actually a pretty strong incentive. So if they cannot take away from this, the impact is really big. Well, because all the education that I've done to my person, my citizen, as the country Nigeria, or as the country Philippines, all the education that I have spent educating that person has gone away. So therefore, because that person has gone away, they cannot benefit the Nigerian or any other developing country's economy, essentially meaning that the developing countries stay stagnant. Their economy cannot develop, continuing for their people and their people inside the country to be poor and poor and poor. But why does nationalism be a tipping point? Well, because nationalism makes me proud of my country and my country only. For other reasons than individualism, because I like my culture, I need to stay in my country. I like my ancestors and what our ancestors did for a country, and I'm willing to sacrifice for them. I like my national heroes that fought against colonialism, and I like who I am as my identity. I like that we have the sculptures of us and the distinct styles of art and sculptures and music that we have created as our community. I like the country that my parents have lived, that my grandparents love, that they tell me to stay. I like the food that I eat in general because I like my nationalist country, and I like the characteristics of my country. If we're talking about South Korea, maybe it's like being kind to others and like letting that happen. In Africa, maybe it's Ubuntu, that I exist, you exist, and therefore we all exist, and therefore we should be kind. Those cultures are celebrated, so therefore brain drain is much more prevented. But why is this so important? Why is this against the OG? Because I don't think we should talk about developed countries. Developed countries are super good anyway. For example, they have a really good economy, so many people live a really great life. I mean, extreme poverty just doesn't exist. And for people with relative poverty, you can get welfare and job education and still live an okay life, and you should focus on developing world. And even for the culture of the developed country. I mean, they have super lots of culture anyway, like French culture, Italian culture is really already famous. But so this is about the developing world. And the OG second arguments might be about this, but this is less important. The OG second argument is less important because it's only about like racist people, but I think solving poverty first is way more important. Solving poverty and putting food on the table for the developing countries, that is the much more important metric we should take, not thinking about the racist people inside of there. I think that's the second issue. So OG's argument is contingent on this, because OG's claim about economy of developing countries than developing because there's less political apathy and more political joining, this is simply not enough. Because even if you create a great educational system, because there's so much political tension, even if I created that and I have STEM education, I educated all my children and people, they flew away to a developed country. So this political attention is only contingent on them not moving, and that is why we take the clash so much away. Even if I develop a tech business within the country, those workers will fly away for a much better economic development. And even if it is a good political attention happens, OG cannot survive without ours. Short opening.
If a person can benefit and save themselves from generational poverty by immigrating, how is it beneficial to force them to stay in their home country?
No, it's really good because those nationalism, they can stay in their own country and therefore allow others to develop in general, making utilitarianistically, making the country much better and stronger. Now, wait is against the OO and probably the CO2 because we give reason why it is a problem if it is rooted in globalization. Because I need the identity of why my nation is good for my nation to develop. And by OO promoting globalization, they prove more why the developed world continues to develop. Because they are the ones where all the capitals, all the people, all the money-earning people are rushing into making this society much richer because you're rooted in globalization. Yeah, that's really not enough. But we also like to mention that nationalism is the only thing equal among developing and developed countries. Because it is impossible to argue that the culture of the developing countries are worse. In fact, they're pretty equal. African cultures are often praised for their independence, millennia-long kingdoms, fitting their own culture of climates and types of houses, beautiful styles and beautiful statues, and it strongly means that therefore there is not a disparity between which culture is better and which culture is not, making developed and developing countries equal. However, it is unequal if you talk about economy, and if economy becomes the main metric, developing countries are always shunned and second-class citizens of developed world. We don't want that.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the member of government. Member of opposition.
Audience ready? Teams ready? Alright, judges ready? With that being said, my time starts in 3, 2, 1. I find it really funny that in a debate that centers around nationalism, almost nobody in this debate understood the true definition of nationalism. So let me, as a member of opposition, extremely late in this debate by the way, clean up this mess and prove why ultimately closing opposition ought to take this debate home. 3 things I'll do in this debate. Firstly, some quick reframing just to clear up what nationalism truly is, as opening opposition did in fact hint at. Secondly, on some basic rebuttals and some basic weighing as to why we went out over all the other teams, but also finally on an extension that we contribute to the debate, i.e. how this applies to the individual on a micro scale and their social relations with others as well. On some basic reframing then, nationalism is the belief that your nation, like literally the textbook definition of nationalism is this, the belief that your nation and your nation's people are inherently better than other nations and people from other nations just because of your national background. Because of this, and because of, for instance, government banks, particularly opening governments, inability to address the true definition of nationalism, they essentially box themselves in. I'll take that later, but that leads to a really great segue then onto some basic comparisons as to why we just win out over opening government in general, which I'll integrate some rebuttals into. First of all, opening government claims that nationalism is inherent fervor for your country's development. By definition, that's just absolutely not true. They box themselves out of the debate. But let's pretend that they didn't box themselves out of the debate yet, and let's just say, let's take their point. They said that, under nationalism that keeps people aware of what's happening around them on a political level, as like it encourages people to become more engaged in politics and like to voice their opinions in the political sphere and whatnot. When they use the example of like Korea's like martial law declaration on December 3rd. But let's use their example and absolutely flip it on its head. You don't have to be nationalist to want to like fight for your rights to the freedom of speech, to the freedom of movement, and your inalienable human rights, as we did in like Korea on December 3rd and whatnot. That is in no way tied to nationalism. The same thing applies to the example that they absolutely did not touch upon but just mentioned, i.e. that of the Black Panther Party. That was not a nationwide movement in any way. That movement was tied to race, not to the United States in itself. We cannot take that. And the fact that the opening government doesn't even know what nationalism is tells you absolutely everything about their credibility to win in this debate. And also on opening government's point about like increased political engagement, we just tell you that this is not true. I don't need to be nationalist, firstly, to want to contribute politically. I don't need to be nationalist to want to have my voice heard. I don't need to be nationalist to want to cast a vote and to improve my nation. I do not see the logical link at all behind this. But also secondly, if you're so nationalist and believe that, your country is like the best, your country is so perfect, I'll actually turn that point on its head because that actually lowers your will to change the status quo because you've been absolutely brainwashed and gaslighted to believing your nation is perfect. Absolutely why opening government just cannot win in this debate. But also on opening opposition, what they tell you, I'll take that later, what opening opposition tells you is that like nationalism essentially like shuts out people's opinions, and that like under like the opposition bench that there will be more discourse because people are able to voice their opinions because they're less likely to be ostracized. We think that this is true, but we tell you that what we uniquely offer on our side of the house is through our extension, which is that we apply a similar line of logic to like an individual on a micro level and their social interactions, their ability to talk with others as well. And on their point on globalization, Ella's speech was full of assertions on this. We can't take any of that. And finally, on this closing government, they just talked about this brain drain, and yes, I'll take that actually.
Maybe read the Oxford Dictionary, because nationalism is pride in attention to your own country, not hating others.
We tell you that although like there is like that pride in your own country that often leads to excessive pride, i.e. taking so much pride in your country that you just believe that your country is inherently better than all the others. On their point on brain drain, we tell you that we just cannot take that. They say like, oh, I'm proud of my country, so I feel inclined to stay. That's a really like low level impact argument. We cannot take that into today's debate. But then onto my extension then, which is simply on the potential for social connection. I'll take you, oh actually I won't take you. Humans are inherently social animals and nationalism like absolutely hinders this. And I'll expand on that with some context. With the very upbringing of the human species, we have things like tribalism because humans need to rely on one another in order to survive. This in turn evolved out of like, say like, into nationalism. And nationalism historically has just like led to conflict. For instance, like the rise of nationalism, which was linked to like Napoleon's rise of power in Europe, fueled military conquest in the continent. The same logic applies for World War I and II, specifically with the context of Germany. But we tell you that not only is like nationalism a segue for like conflict, it's also just unnecessary with the current globalization of our society. This also applies to, and we tell you that like nationalism has historically been and never will stop being a segue to conflict, which also applies to each and every individual as well, which is one of the most unique points that we are able to offer because we tell you that nationalism can affect your ability to talk and to like socially like engage with others. Social connections are so important with people. It's like literally ingrained in our humanity. But under nationalism, this is directly hindered at the point as to which you believe you're inherently better than someone else. This is absolutely terrible for your ability to socialize. We have many barriers in our society between like the rich and poor, right and left, so on and so forth. But one thing that I like is in our globalized society, I can talk to people from other nations and still be able to connect with them. Nationalism does not let this happen because what nationalism encourages people to do is start screening, to see people just for their national background. This is no better than racism or any other form of discrimination because we do not tolerate this. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the government whip.
Speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, it seems like this term of nationalism is very controversial in this debate. So before moving on to the crux, let's first clarify this. Okay, clearly saying member of all says by definition it means inherently being better than other nations. We ask them a POI. They say, oh, okay, that might not be the definition, but it will lead to excessive cases. We want to say that is a flaw from the very get-go. But let's engage with that. First of all, we told you also in opening government, which was one thing that OG did well, and second of all, also in Charlie's speech, we told you that is not the case. We told you how in the majority of cases, it isn't simply saying other cultures, they are inferior. That is not nationalism. We told you, and we clarified from the very get-go of this debate. But second of all, even if we take their best case, and even if we follow their characterization, even if we follow that, CG wins this debate through our arguments of sustaining the possibility for developing nations to actually succeed and get their economic stability, which we will further on explain in our team's clashes. So the biggest problem that OG first had is that they tackled the majority of claims of op-bench by their own definition and by saying that racism is not likely to happen since it is loving your country. We also agree with that. However, the problem with OG was that they only focused on and they only relied on that definition. If we love your country, that is not going to be a problem. However, Judge, we're willing to bite the bullet as a closing government, we're willing to bite the bullet and say and engage with what they're actually trying to provide with us. They're trying to say how there will be how there will be racism because if you think your country is superior and whatnot, then there will be cases where you can actually think other countries and their cultures are inferior. First of all, in the very premise, we told you that is not the case because we followed in Charlie's speech, we told you if we actually have this nationalism, this will be same and this will be both guaranteed for both developed nations and developing nations. Therefore, this will not be a distinctive in the society that will not lead to discrimination, which was a lack of mechanism in the whole opposition bench. And even if we take every single thing they say and say there will be some sorts of racism, we see the most important stakeholder in this debate is developing nations, and in that perspective, even with those harms, we still allow them to have economic stability, and we see how that is a huge benefit, only closing government guarantees at the end of the day. And two questions I want to clarify. First of all, why is the current nationalism demonized? We told you, and also the OG kind of told you, although Charlie actually explained it more. First of all, the reason is because it is radical, and second of all, it is because it created stereotypes and clashes in the past. We told you in Charlie's speech, it is unjustified for the opposition to simply say we should not give a chance because there are flaws like people like Hitler. But Judge, we want to tell you how the only cases that they're engaging with is only under their own definition, how nationalism is radical, it is full of racism. We want them to engage with the real debate. Second of all, we want to ask you a question. What would have happened without the demonization of nationalism? We will actually talk about this in our team's case. And first of all, let's first talk about the opening government. So OG talks about by way with the OG, they talk about how nationalism, they can guarantee political stability, and they say they can have more trust between government and society. So again, the main problem with OG is they are not charitable with the opposition event, which is only done by the closing government. And we as CG take opposition bullet and they take it to the rest. And second of all, we clearly see how they fail to target the most essential stakeholder at the end of the day, which is the minority. We told you in Charlie's speech, the already developed nations, they already have a sustained and they already have a strong layered culture, economy, and all the bases that civilians can actually live their further lives as well. However, for the developing nations, we see how nationalism can be a tool for them to sustain and actually develop in the future. We clearly believe that these minor nations, these developing nations, not being brain drowned is going to be the most crucial factor we have to acknowledge at the end of the day. Second of all, let's talk about OO. So OO talks about how Yoon Suk-yeol's interest was in nationalism, therefore they want to flip this argument saying how some individuals can become radical and make some actions towards society. No, thank you. However, Judge, that is not exclusive. Wait, I'll take your PY.
Oh. Okay, on your extension, how can you abandon a person who might starve or be homeless unless they immigrate for the fleeting hope of somehow improving your country generations later?
Okay.
Shouldn't we value vulnerability?
No, first of all, again, they're only trying to talk about very, very radical cases. But Judge, first of all, we want to actually talk about the long term. Because the reason why there's a poverty cycle in the current status quo is because those nations, those developing nations, they're all getting brain drowned, and the people that actually can maintain and actually develop a certain society or a nation are going out to other nations. Therefore, if we actually see the macroscopic and long term, only NCG can we actually take this debate home. Last of all, we want to talk about the case that closing opposition try to engage with. So they say nationalism preventing brain drain is low impact. Absolutely, this is not true, and there's high impact from the very get-go. We tell you, the skilled people of developing society and country stays in your country, which allows society to develop in the long term. Second of all, they create high money earning companies, which will provide employment of that certain nation. We see for developing countries, the only side providing benefits is closing government. And second of all, they try to make this very derivative extension, which was clearly mentioned already in opening opposition. They see how they can have social connection. Judge, this is not true. This is guaranteed. Also in team proposition, we have respect towards other countries, and with nationalism, the benefit of developing countries and developed countries is the same because we fall under this nationalism, and I'm more than proud to say CG takes this.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the opposition.
I'm ready when you are. Alright, in that case, my time starts in 3, 2, 1. The opening government came here and they said, the definition of nationalism, the sole desire to contribute to your nation. Wait, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Because that sounds ridiculous, right? Nationalism is not the sole desire or burning desire to contribute. No, nationalism is this pride in one's nation, and it is that radical pride that ultimately, like my first speaker says, results in you looking down on other people, thinking you are superior. But even under the assumption that this is the definition of nationalism, let's play with that a little. Nationalism is the burning desire to contribute. Okay, sure. But what happens to the people who don't want to contribute? What happens to the people who fail to contribute? This is a point that none other teams addressed. So let me tell you a bit more about that, right? Note that the whole essence of nationalism operates in a way that is catered to the societal group as a whole. What does this mean? If I'm a nationalist, I'm proud of my people. I'm proud of the things my people have accomplished. So if I see someone who does not share that same views as me, I'll take that a bit later, who share the same views as me, I immediately choose to shun them. Why? Because it is my nationalistic belief. It is the societal belief that I am so proud of my nation, and that is the burning desire to contribute, yeah, sure, but I see people who are simply not contributing, and that is something that none of the teams fail to address. Sure.
When society treats you as not deserving of basic rights, as with what happened in the third estate of France or to African Americans in America, you need to believe and empower yourselves unconditionally to create real change, which is the definition of nationalism.
Thank you for that question. In regards to examples, we have plenty coming later in the speech, so please wait for that. I will be entertaining different examples, and I'll be explaining as to why the demonization of nationalism is made. So please wait until the speech is almost over, right? Okay, so let's move on, right? The first argument upholds the nation. Nationalism capitalizes on the desire to develop. Okay, sure, great. But what happens at the expense of it? What is the expense of that? We tell you that the expense of that is other people. It's more explained about that later. Second argument, keeps higher powers accountable, right? There's an increase in voter turnout, and this fuels political discussion. And opening opposition claims that there are viable ways to do this. There are other viable ways to do this, and under the presence of nationalism, it will actually be more discussion. Okay, but why is this bad? Why are the votes innately bad? Why is nationalism skewing the votes? That is something that nobody has explained, and let me do that. Like I said before, nationalism is a sense of group thinking. It's a herd movement, right? So if I don't feel necessarily nationalistic, but if my peers feel nationalistic and they get me into that particular union, right? As a whole, I'll be pressured to make certain political decisions that I otherwise wouldn't have made. So their second argument on keeps higher powers accountable is not necessarily true, and this is under the faulty assumption that I have full autonomy, that I have full control of the political decisions I'm making. Not necessarily true, right? But let me give you another example of what nationalism really looks like, because I know you're begging for that question, right? The Proud Boys. The Proud Boys is what nationalism really looks like. Capitol Hill. These are nationalistic groups, right, that are extremely easily exploited because they think that there is a potential threat to their nation. They are so proud, they are so morally, they believe that they are so morally superior on a tangible sense that they actually think that this could actually be harmed, and this results in further radicalization. So we actually argue that nationalism creates more radical groups rather than disbanding them. Later. Something that opening government really said, something that really contributes to our extension, right? They say that just because you are a nationalist doesn't mean that you will start hating on people from other countries. They give us the example of President Yoon supporters, right? They say President Yoon supporters will not start harassing people from Palestine. But of course, that's true. But let's change that a little, right? Instead of President Yoon supporters, think about Israelis. You're an Israeli, and you see a couple people from Palestine. You will not be the most friendly from them, especially if you're a nationalist, right? We actually see nationalists literally taking arms against Palestinians because this is the amount of radicalization group nationalism causes on individuals. And this directly connects to the brain drain. They say brain drain, it'll make people proud of my country, I end up staying, I benefit other future generations. Great, that's very long term. They say that there are other viable alternatives. And we can actually argue that nationalism deters more. That is the unique topic that we are choosing to debate upon. We actually say that the harms outweigh the benefits in this sense, because regardless of presence of brain drain or not, nationalism has bigger concerns that closing government just has failed to address. Thank you.
That concludes the grand finals for this Oxford School. Congratulations to all of the debaters. Thank you for the spectators. Please wait at the auditorium for the results.
Thank you.
Oh my god, this sweat, bro. I was okay.
just,
Hey,
we're white team, we just gave it to the.
I had to have a front crush on you.
Why?
Yay!
We're not coming back.
I will.
We have a chance not. Wait, bro, I can't tell.
Yeah,
you
guys,
guys
you
actually
can take all your stuff. So
Charlie, you have to take everything.
Do I need to?
Yeah.
You're going to the auditorium.
Thank you.
Also, Charlie.
Thank you.